Many of you have probably heard of Bitcoin mining. I don't know if you've heard of all the other types of mining that can be done. I started my involvement with cryptocurrency in 2012 when I discovered that you could create Bitcoin using computers and doing processing for the network. And this processing is essentially taking transactions and adding them to the blockchain, and you get a reward in Bitcoin. So way back in 2012, this really appealed to me. It was a combination of software, hardware, and firmware that really appealed to me as a technologist. And then I also started realizing that mining essentially and its physical infrastructure form the basis of the plumbing of the way blockchains work. So without it, you don't have transactions flowing. So it seemed like a very critical part of the blockchain ecosystem, and I wanted to go for that part of it. I wanted to be involved in that part of it. So I was an engineer at Microsoft, and sort of ironically, in 2005, I was working for Xbox Live Network, and Xbox Live and Microsoft have had this system called Microsoft Points. You could buy a card at Best Buy or an electronics store that would have points on it that you could redeem within the Xbox Live network. And I worked on a system as a software engineer to mint those tokens, and we used hashing to do this. And I had no idea that 5 years later, 4 to 5 years later, Bitcoin was going to be a thing. But when I saw Bitcoin in 2012 and I started digging into the technology, I immediately understood this because this was something I was already familiar with. So that was another reason that I wanted to get involved in this transaction processing part of the ecosystem. I formed a company called Mega Big Power. It was sort of like if I was going to name my company after an anime cartoon, what would it be? And the idea was to explore this idea of doing mining at megawatt scale. Could we build transaction processing facilities at megawatt scale and still be efficient, still make a good business? So that was the challenge. Many said it couldn't be done. Now, it's funny, 1 megawatt facility is considered actually a little on the small side. We formed GigaWatt in 2017, and we're finishing about 60 megawatts of facility. So I'll hopefully illustrate that to you, what that looks like. One of the key factors of doing mining as a business is the power cost. Power costs are the fixed costs that every miner has to pay, and it's sort of an elegant and terrible system altogether where you're mining all this Bitcoin, but you can't hold it all for yourself. You have to pay your power bill, so miners are forced essentially to flush some of that Bitcoin back out into the ecosystem, which is the beautiful part of the way proof-of-work blockchains work. If everybody could just mine it and hoard it for themselves, we'd have a big problem. So as much as I've had to sell so many Bitcoin over the years, I see it as a good thing. I even believe that we may not be here today or at these kinds of prices with Bitcoin if all the miners didn't have to sell. Early days, the first mine that I built, we had a very advantageous ASIC chip for mining Bitcoin. It was very power efficient. I built only 1/4 of a megawatt. That was the first facility. But back in 2013 is when we actually got that fired up. Back then, 1/4 of a megawatt, I literally had 20% of the world's mining of Bitcoin transactions. So it's come a long way since then. The rest of the world jumped on, and I rapidly saw my market share declining. So it's kind of the scaling race. So that's why GigaWatt's at 60 megawatts and growing. We have plans for hundreds more megawatts of transaction processing. In 2017, we did an ICO. With Cryptonomous as our ICO partner, and we raised $22.5 million. And then we also then sold about $50 million worth of computing hardware into the facilities that we built. Very successful project. We raised 10,000 Bitcoin. It was one of the larger ICOs, and it was, I think, one of the more unique ICOs. I'll explain it here. The idea was, let's take a token and have that token represent 1 watt, access to 1 watt of this power infrastructure at our excellent economics. That cheap power, again, that essentially you want to think about mining as a cost of production model. So if you can, it's sort of like if you can bring the oil out of the ground cheaper, if you can pull the gold out of the ground cheaper, then your cost of production is lower. So with GigaWatt, if you get involved with GigaWatt today, for example, you can make a Bitcoin for about $4,000 cost. And that cost ramps up slowly, but essentially you're always making Bitcoin for less than market, which is the key point to this whole concept. You want to accrue, you want to accumulate the asset, and you want your cost of producing that asset to be lower than what the market is. And that's essentially a business model, a business case for doing mining. At least it was, and I'll explain where we're going with this idea to expand on this idea with what GigaWatt's doing and its partner projects. So if you have heard of data centers, there's different tiers of data centers, and the technology they employ address a different set of requirements, from security to redundancy, mostly redundancy for cooling and those kinds of things. I call this the 1990s data center model. And admittedly, when I first built a facility, I emulated that. I think everybody essentially does that. They think that this is the form factor that a Bitcoin mine should look like. And after a few projects, I realized we're building for an old paradigm. There's a new set of requirements here that blockchain accommodates. The fault tolerance that data centers express in their redundancy is not needed for blockchain. Blockchain continues to run. Bitcoin's never gone offline. Bitcoin miners may have gotten offline, but the platform itself continues to run, and that's because the fault tolerance is inherent in the blockchain protocol. So thinking about this, how would we reinvent what a data center is? So that's where GigaWatt created the Gigapod concept, and we create a prefab modular kit. It's a very small facility, so that it's air cooled. It's very sort of, I call it reactive to the outside air temperature. And this cuts massive costs out of the equation, but it also allows us to do something that no data centers are currently able to do. We are using from 94 to about 98% depending on the time of year, we're using 94 to 98% of the energy delivered to our pods for compute. Only a small percentage of that energy has to go for things like fans and lights and this kind of thing. So in the data center world, there's a term called PUE, which is power utilization efficiency. The PUE that we're able to achieve with blockchain data centers is absolutely far and away better than anything any data centers are able to achieve. So if you hear people talking about how cryptocurrency mining is wasting energy, my reaction to that is blockchain and cryptocurrencies are driving more efficiency to compute for a global supercomputing layer than mankind has ever seen. This is a net positive for the world, for the earth, for all the energy usage. And what's coming is this massive wave of demand for compute. And it goes beyond making cryptocurrencies, but the demand curve for compute is massively increasing, AI being just one example of why. Okay, so we have this Gigapod. It's a 1.5 megawatt dedicated, very specifically designed form factor for air-cooled computing. And GigaWatt manufactures these as a kit, and we've built several sites. We've got about 25 of these built. We're continually building more and more each day. It only takes a contractor 3 days to pour the foundation and 3 days to set up the facility, the actual box, and then electricians move in and start doing the power after that. So it's a very fast build. I'm not getting any slide advancement here, guys. Maybe the battery died on this thing. Oh, wow. Okay, so maybe we got a problem with our slide deck. I'll just wing it. Thank you. So we have the Gigapods. We're actually selling gigapods so you can get into this business yourself. When you buy a gigapod, you essentially achieve the same economics as if you had bought our token last year. So you get a very favorable all-in power and managed power rate, which enables you to essentially make that Bitcoin for $4,000 against its current market price. Again, I see it as a business of accumulating the asset for a low cost of production. And if you do it that way, your portfolio will outperform. I've seen it again and again over the years. So where is mining taking us? This is the part that I think is what I want you to take away from this presentation is it started with cryptocurrency mining. It started with Bitcoin. Then we started adding additional blockchains. We have Litecoin, we have Dash, Monero, a number of other cryptocurrencies. But what it's enabled us to do is build this specialized high-performance computing center that we're now able to leverage some of this type of computing where there's overlap with other industries. So for example, Ethereum mining is done with a specialized processor called a GPU. And GigaWatt's deployed tens of thousands of GPUs for Ethereum mining, but it turns out that those GPUs can be leveraged for other types of compute. And that other types of compute are CGI rendering, which is the act of taking a computer and producing imagery from 3D models. And you'll learn more about that next because we're going to have a partner project of ours called Leonardo come up and discuss. Marco's going to come up and discuss this project we're working on to do CGI render. Machine learning and AI applications are also enabled by using these GPU processors. So if you look at this as a convergence, you've got artificial intelligence, machine learning, all this high science computing converging via blockchains with cryptocurrency facilities. So the bootstrap to building all of this facility infrastructure is cryptocurrency mining. GigaWatt operates 24/7 revenue generating cryptocurrency mining. Anytime it can get the additional work to do machine learning, CGI render, it can take that processing, switch it over to the rendering applications, and make, right now, a significant revenue bump for our customers. So what I see happening is that cryptocurrency is bringing about this participation wave where the person off the street who wants to create cryptocurrency is motivated to do that, will take their dollars and they'll invest and they'll buy compute. They may not understand it very well. They may not know how to maintain it. That's what they come to GigaWatt for, but they want in. They want to participate in this ecosystem. What they may not realize they're doing is they're participating in the construction of a global supercomputing layer that will be distributed across the world and provide this sort of ad hoc, pay-as-you-go access to a variety of supercomputing capabilities that we just haven't had before. And when we talk about supercompute, most people, I think, understand enough about supercompute to know that it's essentially extremely prohibitively expensive to use. What blockchain does is it drives a sort of a commoditization of pricing so that people can access this for substantially less. So we'll have smaller operators, smaller teams, smaller budgets accessing this kind of compute at scales they've never really had access to before. And that's what really excites me about this, because we're able to see now how we can get from here to there, how we can actually affect this giant computing layer that hasn't existed but is now available for pricing that makes sense. So this is what I've become most passionate about, I think, is because I can finally see how to get the opportunity to contribute to the construction of something that's really just earth-changing. It's really a step forward. So I invite you to come by our booth if you haven't had a chance to come by and chat. If you're interested in looking at what cryptocurrency mining is and what these other alternate applications are, be glad to talk to you. I'll be around in the conference center all day, and we can go from there. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Marco, and he'll talk about Leonardo Render, which is this excellent application for the same equipment that we use to mine cryptocurrencies like Ethereum. So thank you very much.